Each night, a candle is lit, and the whispering tomes open. Inside are the strange, the forgotten, the stories time tried to silence. Some say history is written by the victors, but here the lost are given voice. Breathe deeply and follow me into the hidden chapters of history.
The corridor that never sleeps. You wake beneath red emergency lights that never turn off. The air hums steady as a power station, thin with ozone and something older magnetized dust, perhaps. The clock on the far wall says 1953. The smaller clock beside it insists on 1962. Both tick at once, out of step. The sound is like two hearts trying to share a body. Along the corridor, reels spin on metal tables. Their ribboned spools whisper through small brass mouths. The hiss is delicate, like steam from a kettle left unattended. A line of glass doors reflects your outline again and again, your own shadow becoming a file of witnesses. Someone breathes behind one of the panels, a soft, rhythmic exhale that might be rest or waiting. This place doesn't feel abandoned, only paused. Sleep hums here as if it were a current flowing through machines instead of minds. Each monitor glows with its faint fingerprint of light, square halos repeating into the dark like infinite watchtowers. The hum deepens. You can almost hear the secret underneath. It's the murmur of a history that studied quietness, as if silence itself could be weaponized. During the Cold War, every heartbeat, every blink, every night's rest was counted and compared. To close one's eyes was no longer an act of peace, it was data, measurable and exploitable. Governments and laboratories began testing how long the body could last without surrendering to dreams. You step forward, and the light follows, as if drawn by question. A faint click behind the wall answers a relay closing or a tape beginning. The corridor feels alive again. You pass a viewing window, beds lined side by side, each with electrodes fastened to narrow skulls. Spidery wires weave into grey boxes and wooden clipboards hang from the rails. The numbers crawl across thin paper strips in endless columns. Behind the glass, a motionless face twitches, its eyes darting under lids as though some buried script were being rehearsed. For a moment the air shifts, the hum turns softer, lower, more human. Someone, somewhere, exhales through a microphone. You realize these sounds have been looping for decades. The sleepers are echoes of experiments long disbanded, yet they still dream within the circuit. During those tense years, researchers on both sides of the Iron Curtain believed the mind could be taught to obey, even in its most private hours. Sleep, once a sanctuary, became a frontier for control. It was measured, charted, interrupted. A soldier who could fight without fatigue. An operative who never revealed secrets, even when dreaming these were desires that funded entire wings of hidden science. Time stretches thin in the corridor. The twin clocks keep arguing. One belongs to the dawn of those experiments, the other to their aftermath. You realize you're standing between them inside the long moment where discovery became doctrine. You pass shelves lined with real boxes stamped in fading ink. SLFR1, pilot fatigued. SLFR12, conditioned reflex sleep. Metric D4, psychic driving. Each label is both clue and confession. The air trembles when the ventilation restarts. scattering cinders of light through the haze. But every hum, every glow feels like part of the same slow heartbeat, half technology, half regret. The deeper you walk, the more the corridor forgets which decade it belongs to. A door bears the warning authorized personnel only, sleep study in progress. The paint flakes, yet a bulb burns beyond it. Sleep, it seems, is still being studied endlessly, perhaps unwilling to admit failure. You pause at the threshold. Behind is the present outside, a world rebuilt over archives that never truly closed. Ahead lies candlelight and ticker tape, the ancestral pulse of curiosity that never learned caution. The hum steadies into a lullaby of machines, and the voice shears, or another's whispers softly through the intercom. To understand where the dream began, we have to go back before the Cold War corridors, before the glowing electrodes, before the numbers learned to listen. Beyond the door, a faint smell of wax and ink drifts upward, older than the corridors, older than the red pulse of electric sleep. The rel-to-rel hiss thins to silence. The clocks freeze together on midnight dot. Light bends. Time folds like a page turning backward. You step through, and the red hum fades. Candle flames tremble, illuminating a lecture hall from another century, a place where sleep was still mystery, not measurement. The corridor behind you dissolves into distant static as the walls breathe again in oil and shadow. And as the vision steadies, the story rewinds to its beginning, the roots of science beneath candlelight, where hypnosis and dreams first became subjects not of poetry, but of experiment. Roots beneath the candlelight. The dream of controlling sleep began in rooms that still smelled of oil lamps and damp stone. In the late 19th century, when medicine was half theater and half revelation, people gathered under flickering candlelight to watch minds dissolve beneath the voice of a single man. He stood before his audience at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. A physician turned showman, Jean-Martin Charcot, believed that hypnosis was not magic, but anatomy misunderstood. His hand would rise, and a patient, usually a poor woman brought in from the streets, would stiffen, eyes wide yet unreachable, caught between waking and surrender. The crowd whispered as she spoke in tones not her own, as though her body had become an instrument another will could play. In that strange hush, something more than spectacle was forming. Charcot's experiments painted a boundary line where consciousness could be pressed and examined. His observations, mapped in meticulous sketches and transcribed in the fevered language of early neurology, gave sleep a new purpose. Not rest, but a window into obedience. What if suggestion could bypass reason? What if thought could be directed while the senses were quiet? His lectures reached beyond Paris, translated in journals that smelled of ink and iron filings, spreading the idea that slumber might be structured like an experiment. Further east, another patient listener watched the same mystery through glass vials and conditioned bells. Ivan Pavlov, working in a cold St. Petersburg laboratory, studied dogs that drooled to the rhythm of metal. From saliva and sound he extracted the logic of reflex, a bridge between biology and will. When the dogs slept, their twitching claws echoed the signals he had trained into them while awake. Pavlov wondered whether consciousness truly ever ended, or simply dimmed to make room for invisible orders. His notebook spoke of a second state, a shifting threshold that could be entered, and programmed a prelude to what would one day be called conditioning by sleep. In Vienna, Sigmund Freud pursued the dream from within rather than across it. His patients reclined on fainting couches instead of iron cots. While Charcot and Pavlov measured the body, Freud traced the wandering speech of its unconscious. He believed sleep was not a curtain but a conduit, the mind whispering its unspoken laws through metaphor. In his quiet study, the ticking clock and the patient's murmurs folded into one long, interior rhythm. He charted dreams as maps of conflict, diagrams of hidden command. Behind his theories hummed the same question as in every lab. Could the machinery of desire, if its gears were found, be tuned like any other system? The century tilted. Gas lamps brightened into electric bulbs. The soft shadows of candlelight gave way to sharp reflections on glass. Yet those early speculations lingered like residues beneath the new glare. Hypnosis became suggestion therapy. Reflex conditioning became learning. Dream interpretation became psychoanalysis. But each preserved the ambition to reach the sleeping mind and speak into it. By the 192s and 30s, the descendants of these thinkers gathered in lecture halls with cleaner floors and more precise instruments. Electrodes replaced the mesmerist's hand. The laboratory no longer resembled a church, but a factory of controlled darkness. Sleep, once romantic, turned measurable. It could be charted, its stages named. The idea that the human will might sway between waking and trance hardened into science's new vocabulary: stimulus, response, recovery, fatigue, words that would soon migrate from academia into the manuals of command. In that transition from salon to laboratory, the flame of the candles still glowed faintly beneath the hum of wires. Hypnosis had taught that suggestion could occupy a resting mind. Reflex had shown that habit could outlive intention. Dream psychology convinced nations that the night held secrets worth decoding. When the century's next crisis gathered its clouds, these theories waited like blueprints in dusty drawers. To the watchers of the future, those fragile origins would seem almost innocent. Patients under trance, dogs in cages, dreamers confessing in half-sleep. None could know how soon their discoveries would be joined in uniform, how the language of the psyche would be drafted into the service of vigilance. The candle gutters, the laboratory door closes. Beneath its faint smoke, a new era inhales the world, preparing to measure exhaustion as thoroughly as hope. The next dream opens not in a bed, but in the roar of engine. Over Europe, 1943, a bomber crew flies through what their medical officers call the 33rd hour. Their eyes are fixed open, pupils wide as coins, breath fogging the oxygen masks. They have been awake since the morning before, tasked to deliver the next steel message across the channel. At this altitude, even rest is militarised, the mind drilled to obey orders that come from fatigue itself. One man grips the yoke and murmurs a phrase that makes no sense. His co-pilot stares forward without hearing. They have crossed the point where waking and dream begin to merge. Reports from the Royal Air Force record these flights in language that reads more like fever than science. Pilots describing clouds that turned to faces, dials that melted like wax under pressure, whole squadrons blinking out of radio contact because exhaustion arrived quicker than courage. The doctors who greeted survivors at landing fields began keeping secret lists of hours: how many awake before vision blurred, how long before hallucinations set in. The data grew stern and clinical. 10 times more accidents occurred past the 48th hour. Decision speed declined after the 30th. But beneath the numbers was another pattern. Men deprived of sleep spoke more readily, confessed faster, laughed without control. It frightened commanders even as they exploited it. The sky had become one great human experiment. On the ground, armies pressed the same limits. Soviet medical detachments hauled notebooks through the mud of Stalingrad, recording how the brain frayed after nights under bombardment. They charted what they called false awakenings, shell-shocked. Soldiers certain they had risen from sleep when they had never closed their eyes. Their doctors noted tremors, the sudden tears that came mid-sentence, the small seizures of the will. One report said that a man could endure hunger longer than sleeplessness. Deprived of dreams, he began inventing them with his eyes open. Across the ocean, American physiologists tried to measure the same phenomenon under sterile light. At small bases, volunteers were kept awake before marksmanship trials, endurance runs, Morse code sessions. Their mistakes mounted in predictable rhythms, like tides. Yet when they were asked afterward what they remembered, many described moments of piercing seconds, when fatigue unlocked thoughts they hadn't known they possessed. Laboratory instruments caught tremors in their brainwaves that pulsed almost musically. Scientists began to suspect that sleeplessness didn't merely destroy, ordered reshaped it. A mind stripped of rest became pliable, suggestible, a medium waiting for inscription. Inkermen tents and briefing halls. The rumors returned in another form. Could interrogation become more effective if the subject was simply kept awake? Could forced wakefulness replace physical pain? No one admitted such experiments on record, yet their results crept like rumor into training manuals. Signs of degradation to observe, thresholds at which the subject would voluntarily confide. War turned every human limit into a metric, every hour without sleep into data. For civilians, blackout curtains and rationed nights mirrored the same lesson. Factory sirens dictated when workers rose, when they dozed. In the Soviet sphere, pollsters urged industrial vigilance as a patriotic act, the nation awake against its enemies. Americans spoke of round-the-clock production, a phrase that made insomnia sound heroic. When the bombers came, cities on both sides already knew how to function half-conscious. What began as necessity grew into obsession. Files from the later years of the war list hundreds of technicians assigned to fatigue research. Chemists analyzing stimulants, psychologists cataloging sleepless behavior. Physicians tracing the long recovery curves of veterans who could no longer dream. In their charts, the human body looks like a machine deprived of maintenance, its circuits sparking, its rhythm When the peace finally arrived, it was filled with men and women who slept fitfully, their brains still tuned to alarms. The world had proved that fatigue could win battles or betray secrets, that exhaustion could be measured like fuel. In the aftermath, the silence between wars began to sound like a laboratory waiting to resume. The engines fade, the night sky empties. Somewhere a reel begins to spin, copying these wartime notes for future use. The experiment has only changed its purpose, now shifting from survival to understanding. The corridor of research reopens, humming softly once more. The birth of psychophysiology. After the guns quieted, new sounds filled the laboratory's soft clicks. Faint electric murmurs, the steady inhale of vacuum tubes igniting. It was the late 194s, and the war's notebooks had passed into calmer hands. Physiologists, psychiatrists, and engineers began meeting in shared corridors, their fields no longer divided by language. Psychology studied mind, physiology studied body. Now, together, they built instruments nimble enough to trace both at once. They called it psychophysiology, discipline measured in millivolts and tremors. Across the universities of North America, returning veterans volunteered for studies that promised no harm, only understanding. Electrodes dotted their scalps, wires fed into oscillographs that pulsed like small hearts. The research question seemed simple. How does fatigue shape thought? But behind it lay deeper unease. The same governments that had chartered sleepless bombardiers now funded the science of recovery, hoping the data might prevent the next collapse or prepare for it. Small grants multiplied through military channels, with quiet footnotes such as human performance, cognitive assurance, stress resilience. The language softened what remained essentially an extension of wartime vigilance. In dim basements, reels turned through slow nights as subjects were asked to rest, to wake, to dream on cue. Each breath, each heartbeat, each involuntary twitch etched itself as ink onto moving paper. For the first time, scientists could watch the body negotiate sleep in real time waves like tides rolling across a single night. Researchers observed that recovery wasn't mere absence of work. It was its inverse rhythm, precise as any machine's calibration. Awareness ebbed, then reformed. Muscles entered patterns. Voices stuttered with periodic sighs. The human brain displayed intervals of symmetry that hinted at coded routine, automation built into rest itself. In Leningrad, physiologists raised beneath Pavlov's lineage searched the same problem through austere patience. They placed electrodes on tired factory workers, recording bursts of electricity that rippled through cortex and limb alike. Their reports spoke of protective inhibition, the brain's self-command to fall asleep after exhaustion, an act of order rather than surrender. Sleep became not contrast to control, but another form of it, a governor, a safety valve written in biology. Yet they also noted something unsettling. Under certain stimuli, a repetitive sound, dim light whispered instruction. Subjects drifted toward a semi-waking trance in which their reflexes could still obey. It blurred the line between therapy and conditioning. They called it induced rest. The phrase glowed faintly across paper like an open invitation. Meanwhile, at American institutes under military fellowship, electrodes shone brighter, dialed steadier. Machines could now amplify brain potentials by 1,000-fold. Scientists talked of consciousness as circuitry switching states between excitation and quiescence. Never before had sleep looked so mechanical, a sequence of voltage changes that could, theoretically, be replicated. The mind, one researcher wrote, reveals itself best when it relinquishes control. So the body of the 20th century learned to narrate its dreams through light. A green trace on graphing paper replaced the language of introspection. What these tracings promised was an astonishingly simpler way to predict exhaustion before failure, to guard the citizen, the pilot, the worker from collapse. But what they suggested went further. If rest could be described by numbers, perhaps it could also be directed by them. The century's fatigue had found its mirror sleep observed until it became command. In the decade after the war, the contest for the sleeping mind crossed borders as Azilia's radiostatic. Behind the Eastern Curtain, laboratories in Moscow and Leningrad bristled with electrodes, oscilloscopes, and the echo of Pavlov's doctrine. Every reflex could be conditioned, every reflex undone. The Institute for Higher Nervous Activity, founded to extend his experiments, became the cradle of a new ambition to master consciousness itself. Researchers there spoke of controllable rest, a state between waking and sleep where suggestion reached deepest. The phrase sounded medical but carried political voltage. If waking thought could be trained by pause and repetition, perhaps entire populations could be studied the same way. So the Soviet films that documented these trials never claimed cruelty. They showed white coats, still faces, monitors blooming in grayscale. In one reel, a subject reclines as a metronome ticks. A voice counts backward through a haze of echo. The man's eyes flutter but never open. The report below the film explains conditioned reflex sleep, a trance maintained by rhythmic stimulus in which words could be implanted and recalled. At conferences, the language was careful, terms like restorative inhibition, guided fatigue, speech before waking, but Western translators noticed the undertone. The boundary between recuperation and reprogramming had nearly vanished. Across embassies and universities, analysts studied the footage frame by frame. British and American officers filed cables describing behavioral conditioning associated with rest state induction. 2 intelligence circles still haunted by stories of captured airmen confessing to ISIL in Far Eastern prisons. These papers read like dark proof. What if sleep itself could be used as interrogation? No wounds, only suggestion whispered beneath consciousness. The possibility moved quickly from rumor to mandate. Within a year, parallel projects appeared in Western funding rosters under gentle phrases such as fatigue recovery and extended cognitive observation. In Soviet journals, meanwhile, researchers boasted of other successes. Students, learning simple foreign phrases, played repeatedly during rest stages. Miners trained through nighttime broadcasts to adjust breathing for endurance shifts. A physician from the Moscow Brain Institute described this twilight interval as the most honest part of the mind. Such optimism masked the tension underneath, between science and obedience, exploration and control. Every discovery carried 2 shadows, one medical, one ideological. For individual citizens, the language of vigilance soon entered ordinary sleep. Posters urged workers to practice rational rest. Schools broadcast calm voices through dormitory speakers at evening roll call. The empire dreamed of unity measured by circadian clock. A well-trained nervous system never truly sleeps. One popular pamphlet announced, its cover decorated with a blazing red sunrise. Yet, even among loyal scientists, there were murmurs of unease. Some noted that suggestion required trust between speaker and subject, a fragile element easily poised by propaganda. Others feared that turning rest into instrumentation might unravel its natural repair. Their caution vanished quietly into archives, but the data continued. Machine graphs filled with rolling rhythms labeled obedient sleep. Across the ocean, the same rhythms pulsed in reverse. On American paper mirror, experiment justified as defense. From Washington briefing rooms to university basements, every project carried the same undercurrent. If our rivals could train the subconscious, we must learn the same skill. Thus, the Iron Curtain of politics became, for science, a mirror of consciousness itself each side, reflecting the other's hidden studies, each denying it dreamed while secretly listening for proof. By decade's end, even the language of rest had grown divided. In Russian, uspokojenie pacification. In English, stability under stress. Both described attempts to manage fear through control. Both blurred biology with doctrine. And somewhere between them, the human mind became a new border crossed, nightly, mapped by light. To the agency studying the fragile borders of the mind, the Soviet promise of conditioned sleep was both challenge and permission. Between 195 and 1953, in cluttered rooms hidden behind unmarked doors, the United States began assembling its own constellation of quiet programs. They carried neutral names, Project Bluebird, then Project Artichoke, but their purpose sat uneasily between defense and desire. To blunt interrogation, to resist brainwashing, to understand how far consciousness could be stretched before it broke. The early documents read like a policymaker's riddle. Could hypnosis suppress memory long enough to protect a captured agent? Could suggestion in half-sleep extract information without visible harm? Scientists from army hospitals and intelligence branches met in fenced facilities, their meetings tinged with both scientific anticipation and cold dread. Bluebird's stated aim was protective, a shield against what Americans imagined their adversaries already practiced. Yet the experiments soon took their own momentum. Curiosity eroded restraint. In one memorandum, the phrase special interrogation techniques masks what participants later described more plainly. Sleep deprivation paired with steady questioning, mild sensory overload replacing violence. Subjects were sometimes volunteers from military prisons, sometimes patients fed sedatives in research wards. Among the earliest files lies a note that sleeplessness, alternating with trance induction, facilitates regression in the subject and increases compliance. The language sounds anatomical, almost detached. The result was anything but. Men forgot where they were, believed themselves, returned to childhood, spoke secrets they barely remembered learning. When transcribed and compared, their replies formed grids of probability mental cartographies drawn over exhaustion. By 1951, the name changed from Bluebird to Artichoke, a move justified in bureaucratic shorthand as reflecting project diversification. Behind that phrase lay a sprawling network linking Navy psychologists, CIA analysts, Navy and Air Force physicians, and a few private researchers whose funding lines curved through front foundations. Artichoke broadened what Bluebird had begun. Hypnosis was now tested alongside chemical disorientation, isolation, and manipulated sleep cycles designed to fracture and rebuild perception. To its architects, these were countermeasures. America preparing antidotes to a foreign toxin. But to those inside the rooms, the distinction between shield and blade blurred quickly. A typical session might begin at midnight under fluorescent glare. A clock in the corner would be covered to erase rhythm. Light and sound remained constant. A subject was kept awake for 40 hours, then permitted brief rest, as recordings murmured behind a partition ordinary words arranged into repetitive suggestion. Interrogators observed from behind glass, noting the moment when rational objection collapsed into obedience. No one called it torture. The reports favored the phrase psychic exhaustion threshold. Yet the numbers, heart rates, skin resistances, waves traced by EEGs, newly adapted from sleep labs, suggest human machinery pushed steadily toward failure. Not all experiments involved coercion. Some sought creation rather than destruction. The implantation of protective amnesia, the art of splitting memory by command. Hypnotists experimented with cues that could trigger secondary identities, modeled loosely on clinical cases. The premise was that consciousness might be compartmentalized for safety, that an operative could carry information. Even he did not remember until the correct signal restored it. Files described tests in hotel rooms and naval warehouses. None achieved precision, yet the possibility lingered like static, that thoughts could be coded into the rhythm of rest. These pursuits flourished in secrecy, their moral limits shielded by language. Memos speak of defensive necessity, controlled stress motifs, semi-conscious inquiry. The reports reach for scientific dignity, passing obedience into stages, dosing responsibility in micrograms. But between the margins, fear breathes plainly. Investigators believed that somewhere, in some communist basement, similar trials were already perfecting the technique. The only protection, they argued, was to master it first. Meanwhile, the surrounding world snored on, oblivious. Commuters read about propaganda and loyalty oaths while, beneath the headlines, technicians calibrated strobing lights and sleep cycles. Over half of the artichokes of produce concerned fatigue, how long a person could stay awake before moral and cognitive collapse. In these tables, humanity looked methodical, almost mechanical, stripped to a sequence of endurance curves. Sleep ceased to be comfort. It became a boundary line to probe. By 1953, the separate branches, chemical, psychological, hypnotic, were judged too entangled to manage. A single title would soon gather them beneath what officials called comprehensive behavioral research. Before the ink dried on the last artichoke memorandum, approval arrived for its successor. The new emblem was colder, simpler, a pair of initials that would stretch across decades of debate culture. Thus, the lamp over Bluebird's final desk flickered out. The papers it left behind whispered less about patriotism than about fascination. Not how to protect men from manipulation, but how far the mind's fatigue could be bent before it forgot resistance. Sleep had become strategy, consciousness, terrain. And somewhere in those file drawers, the boundary between care and coercion finally shut like a closing eyelid. The Umbrella Project, a memorandum signed in the language of restraint, stamped ultra, its ink still damp from a trembling signature. You picture the room where it was born, smoke curling above a polished table. The faces of men who believed they were safeguarding freedom by dissecting the human will. They called it the Umbrella Project, though the name that endured was colder, shorter, and already mythic, M-Cotra. Under that umbrella spread more than 100 sub-projects, each one a filament of curiosity disguised as defense. Universities, hospitals, prisons, Even private clinics found themselves funded by invisible grants, whose origins blurred beneath layers of bureaucracy. The goal was never declared outright, only implied to know how the mind could be entered, altered, or erased without the subject's consent. The laboratories multiplied like shadows after lightning. In basements, patients were dosed with substances that glowed faintly in the dark. In offices, psychologists rehearsed new vocabularies: dissociation, behavioral drift, cognitive collapse. Every file folder carried both promise and apology. What could be learned if memory itself could be dissolved and rewritten? In Montreal, New York, and San Francisco, test subjects slept under ceilings lined with microphones, their dreams interrupted by loops of recorded speech. The recordings spoke of calm, obedience, renewal phrases meant to rebuild shattered psyches, but used to test endurance instead. The reels spun through nights that blurred into weeks. Some participants awoke not knowing their own names. Others never fully awoke at all. The official phrasing was psychic driving, a term as benign as it was brutal. It meant the attempt to overwrite one mind with another through repetition, deprivation, and sleep manipulation. The data read sterile, but between the lines, the paper seemed to sweat. In one facility, electrodes blinked over volunteers kept sedated for months while their senses were starved. The doctors called it depatterning, a word borrowed from electronics, as though consciousness was circuitry that could be cleared and reprogrammed. Elsewhere, agents tested combinations of drugs and hypnosis to blur recollection, hoping to build subjects immune to pain, loyal without memory. The umbrella widened. The rain of funding fell quietly through Frank foundations and academic fellowships. Many of the researchers never knew whose umbrella they stood beneath. They wrote progress reports in clinical prose about temporary amnesia, enhanced suggestibility, long-term disorientation. Each phrase sounded like weather passing, harmless until you looked closer and saw the ruined skies it described. Across the ocean, Allied intelligence agencies mirrored the same ambition, exchanging sanitized results through diplomatic channels. Sleep remained the central mystery, a border where suggestion crossed undetected, where truth could be coaxed or replaced. The sleeping mind is the open door, one directive read unsigned. Our task is to learn how to knock without waking the occupant. Yet even within the program, dissent flickered. A few physicians warned that the experiments produced only confusion, not control. That memory was less a file to be rewritten than a living tissue that scarred when touched. Their reports were buried beneath progress charts, their warnings footnoted out of existence. The reels kept turning. You imagine the corridor again. Its hum older now, the bulbs dimmed to a permanent twilight. In one room, a subject murmurs under the influence of a drug identified only by number. In another, a technician marks time in half hours, recording changes in pulse and posture. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware that its dreams are being mapped against voltage and suggestion. For the architects of the Umbrella Project, the boundaries between science and secrecy dissolved completely. They had inherited the fears of a century and given them machinery. Each experiment promised control. Each result deepened uncertainty. The more they measured, the less they understood. Somewhere in the archives lies a note scrawled in the margin of a declassified transcript. Observation changes the observed. Perhaps the researcher meant physics. Or perhaps he was admitting something else, that in trying to command the mind, they had entered it and were now unable to leave. The project continued through names and sub-numbers, its edges soft with secrecy. Only decades later would fragments, emerge files, misfiled, testimonies half remembered, voices replayed from reels that should have been erased. You stand once more in that long corridor of light, the hum gathering like distant thunder. The clocks disagree, again one insisting the experiment is over, the other refusing to stop. Beneath the umbrella, the rain still falls, steady and invisible, washing the borders between vigilance and obsession. The machines breathe on, unaware of history. Somewhere deep within their circuits, sleep has learned to listen. The flicker beneath the eyelid. 1953, again different room. Different kind of light. Chicago hums outside with the sound of streetcars and new televisions. While inside a small university lab, two men watch a needle dance across graph paper. The machine before them is ordinary, its rhythm patient, almost tender. One man, Eugene Aserinsky, adjusts a wire attached to his sleeping son's temple. The other, Nathaniel Kleitman, scribbles numbers that will one day redraw the map of human rest. They are not spies or soldiers. They do not know that their quiet experiment will one day echo inside interrogation rooms and intelligence briefings. All they know is that when the child dreams, the eyes move rapidly beneath their lids' teeny twitches, tracing invisible film reels of thought. The discovery feels innocent, even luminous. REM sleep becomes a doorway between body and mind, the first physical proof that dreams leave footprints. The charts show rhythms like ocean, tides, periods of stillness, followed by bursts of motion, each wave carrying its own temperature and tone. The researchers speak softly, in awe of their own revelation. To see dreams, even indirectly, feels like stealing light from the soul. What they cannot know is that others are already watching through the same lens with a different intent. In offices across Washington and Moscow, the flicker of REM becomes something more than a biological curiosity. It is potential. If the eye moves when the dream unfolds, then perhaps the dream can be guided. If the body responds while the mind sleeps, perhaps suggestion can find its way through that half-open door. Science and espionage, for a brief moment, share vocabulary. Reports on rapid ocular motions circulate through intelligence channels beside memos on behavioral conditioning. The language is nearly identical: response, reinforcement, resistance. The line between curiosity and control thins until it disappears entirely. Within months, sleep laboratories receive quiet funding to explore communication during low-frequency brain states. Officially, the goal is therapeutic to study recovery, trauma, and stress. Unofficially, the same oscillographs, once used to map fatigue, now record murmured voices repeating across headphones. In one study, subjects are told simple phrases during REM cycles. Upon waking, a few repeat the words without knowing why. It is small, almost meaningless, yet the idea lingers. If memory can be planted in sleep, how deep can it go before it takes root? Meanwhile, the original discoverers remain blissfully detached. Kleitman lectures about circadian rhythms and publishes papers on the science of dreaming. Aserinsky demonstrates his findings at conferences the flickering eyelids projected like living hieroglyphs. The applause sounds like hope-proof that not all research must serve the shadow of war. Still, the timing is cruel. The same year REM is named, MKUltra is approved. The same government that funded recovery research now files requests for sleep manipulation studies. The same data that revealed wonder is repurposed for defense. Across the ocean, Soviet journals echo with similar discoveries. Their researchers describe paradoxical sleep, a state of high brain activity within deep rest. They claim to record words spoken inside dreams, to translate them into waking comprehension. Western analysts read the translations with suspicion. If dreams can be translated, they can be edited. Intelligence briefings begin to use terms like cognitive reinforcement during rest and stimulus thresholds in nocturnal perception. In the sterile language of bureaucracy, the dream becomes both battlefield and laboratory. For the sleepers themselves, nothing seems different. They still close their eyes, sink into the soft dark, drift between thought and oblivion. Yet beneath every eyelid, a small revolution is underway. Machines watching, pens tracing, researchers waiting for a spark in the neural fog that might confirm a secret long suspected, that the dream listens back. By the end of the decade, dozens of institutions across continents hum with the same soft equipment. In each, a thin line trembles on moving paper, marking the body's invisible rhythm. Some lines represent science, others silence dressed as progress. Between them runs a narrow thread of wonder, reminder that the flicker beneath the eyelids belongs to every human who has ever closed their eyes and surrendered to the unknown. When the subjects wake, they rarely remember what was whispered. The scientists record results, file reports, and reset the instruments for the next trial. Outside, dawn breaks indifferent across both hemispheres. The world keeps dreaming, unaware that its dreams have become data. Its rest another reflection of the same quiet ambition, to turn the unknowable into light, and the private into proof. Laboratories of Ambience sit beneath light that never changes. The room is white and humming, the kind of hum that wants to fold you back into yourself. A technician wheels the radar console closer until the sweep fills your vision like a slow tide. Your instructions are simple enough to feel like a trick. Stay awake, respond when the signal appears. Do not close your eyes. At first, you are a machine of small obediences: button, breath, blink. Time slips thinly past. The sweep keeps its perfect circle. Somewhere beyond the glass, they tally your reactions, your pulse, the micro trimmer in your fingers. Hour folds into hour. Your thoughts begin to run like water over polished stone, seeking any channel that will carry them forward. The screen invents movement. Your eyes want to believe. You press the button even when the signal is only memory. The report will later call this a false positive. You call it the moment the room learned how to whisper. You sign another consent form and step into a different corridor with the same smell. The lights here are slightly warmer, as if kindness could be manufactured at a different color temperature. They place you at a desk with columns of numbers and ask you to copy them until the rows lose their borders. When your pen hesitates, a metronome begins somewhere behind you. You don't know if it's meant to steady you or pace your decline. The supervisor's voice is soft, patient, without edges. You hear yourself answer questions you hadn't realized were being asked. Later, they will describe your cooperation as enhanced responsiveness under cognitive load. You only remember the feeling of agreeing with the room. You are moved again, a gentle procession through identical doors, and now the task is simple vigilance. Watch the light, count the tone, stay with us. They never say what happens if you don't. At 30 hours, your hands are sure, and your eyes are glass. At 40, your body remembers laughter with no cause. At 50, the air thickens until every breath is an argument you keep losing. The clock has been covered for your comfort. You learn to feel time in the ache behind your eyes, and the way the walls lean closer when you try to stand. When they finally let you rest, sleep arrives like a fall through a trapdoor. You surface with a local weather of confusion and a stranger's voice in your mouth. They ask what you dreamed. You say you were still in the room. You travel without moving. The lab's geography changes by the labels on the binder's human performance, attentional decay, operational readiness, but every corridor returns you to the same chair. You begin to notice the small rituals that guide you there. The measured water, the clipboard angled just so. The way the technician's smile never reaches her eyes. You decide these are navigational beacons in a sea built to erase direction. Outside these walls, they say, others are doing the same work under different flags. You picture another you in a mine head or a border post on the far side of a map, holding awake for reasons painted on a banner. The language changes, but the promise does not. Vigilance as virtue, sleeplessness as proof. You learn the taxonomy of your own unraveling. Irritability first, a thin wire across your patience. Then the tremor, the small rebellion of muscle against command. Then euphoria, bright and useless, when everything seems possible and nothing can be done. After that, the room begins to decorate itself with shapes the machine cannot confirm, and you understand why the reports avoid simple words like tired. They prefer terms that sound like engineering degradation curve, compliance threshold, transitional cognition as if your mind were a circuit board that could be resoldered with light. You start to answer before the question settles. You start to agree because disagreement requires a kind of balance you cannot afford. Somewhere a pen scratches the phrase, subject demonstrates openness. You feel transparent enough to be poured. You notice, too, the economic of mercy. When they flick the lights lower for a minute, gratitude floods so completely that you would sign anything to keep it. When they return the brightness, you find yourself leaning toward the next kindness, like a plant turning to a window. This, you realize, is part of the lesson. Deprivation writes its own commandments, and relief is the first law. They call the method soft pressure. You understand that softness is a function of comparison. The absence of sleep leaves no mark you can photograph, only the gentle collapse of borders that once kept your answers yours. When they finally release you to real darkness, sleep does not feel like rest so much as surrender. You drop through layers, the way a city elevator opens on empty sublevels no one told you about. In the morning, you are handed a survey that asks you to rate your well-being on a scale that cannot accommodate what the night has done. You check the middle box because the middle is where the questions end. The technician thanks you by your first name, as if the two of you have survived something together. In a way you have. You step back into the corridor and hear identical doors closing all the way down it, each ceiling in its own small weather of hum and breath and instruction. The world above will borrow the logic you've learned. Hero offices lit past midnight, storefronts promising 24 hours, headlines that praise productivity as if it were devotion. You understand now why the lab calls this research. It is not just the body they are measuring. It is the culture they are building, one wakeful hour at a time. Somewhere in a file that will never meet daylight, your results will be graphed into a curve that pretends to be impersonal. But you know the truth the paper can't admit. Endurance isn't a number. It's a shape your mind takes when it is trying not to disappear. The quiet room at McGill. You wake to the sound of a reel turning somewhere beyond the wall. The air tastes faintly of antiseptic and dust, the residue of a hospital that has forgotten what healing means. A voice over the intercom reminds you to relax, though you were never tense until it said so. You lie in a narrow bed inside what they call the Allen Memorial Institute, a wing of McGill University in Montreal. You signed no consent form that you remember, yet your name appears on a clipboard at the foot of the bed, labeled Psychic Driving Patient 17. Wires curl from your temples like ivy, leading into a small box that murmurs with low voltage. A nurse enters, eyes distant, and adjusts a dial. Her expression carries the same calm as the wall's absolute neutrality. The voice returns, clearer now, her own voice, recorded days ago when the doctor asked you to speak about your fears. It plays in endless repetition. You are getting better. You will not resist treatment. You will sleep when told. At first you try to follow the instructions. It feels like kindness to obey. Then the loop continues, hour after hour, until the words lose meaning. The sound becomes texture, and texture becomes a presence pressing against your thoughts. The doctor calls this psychic driving, a form of reconditioning meant to erase the noise of trauma and replace it with cleaner signal. He believes he can depattern the human mind, strip it down to its blank circuitry, and rebuild personality from silence. Sedation follows the playback. You drift through cycles of half-sleep and half-memory. Sometimes they wake you to feed you or attach new electrodes. Sometimes they let you sink until time dissolves. You stop marking days because the light never changes. When they ask how you feel, you use their words. Better, quieter, cooperative. You do not remember choosing them. They say this is progress. Outside the ward, the project's sponsors file neat reports under MKULTRA sub-project numbers, describing the results as promising. The other patients talk in fragments when allowed to speak. One remembers being in this room for months. Another claims to hear songs that no one else can find on the tapes. The nurses write everything down but never respond. The doctor smiles during interviews, proud of the calm he has manufactured. You begin to suspect that he, too, is caught in his own experiment, testing whether a man can convince himself that erasure is mercy. When you finally leave, you are not the same. The city feels brighter, crueler, too loud to fit inside your skull. You see faces of strangers mouthing words from your own tapes. At night, when you close your eyes, you still hear the reel turning. It whispers sleep when told, and you do. Somewhere beneath the building, another voice begins to play, and another life begins to forget, conditioning the Soviet mind. You cross an ocean in your thoughts and arrive in Moscow, 1956. The snow outside glows under sodium lamps, and behind the frosted windows of the Institute for Higher Nervous Activity, another kind of quiet experiment continues. You are no longer a patient, but an observer, or perhaps another subject, depending on where you stand. The corridors smell of ozone and chalk. Researchers in white coats pass each other like ghosts, murmuring about hypnopedia learning in sleep. You are shown a chamber lined with speakers, a bed at its center. The subject lies still beneath a tangle of electrodes while a soft male voice reads simple phrases through the night. Foreign vocabulary, patriotic slogans, mathematical formulas. Every few minutes, the rhythm changes to match the subject's breathing. On a monitor nearby, the tracings of an IG shimmer like low constellations. The scientist beside you smiles and says that the sleeper will remember half of what he hears without realizing why. Conditioned rest, he calls it. A state where consciousness becomes permeable and suggestion slips through unguarded. In the adjoining room, a translator from the West takes note. He does not understand the Russian words, but recognizes the tone, the same cadence used in hypnosis, in interrogation, in prayer. He writes that the procedure seems harmless, but feels like a sermon delivered to the unconscious. Later his report will reach foreign analysts, who will underline the phrase behavioral learning during rest state exposure and send it to intelligence agencies already chasing the same idea. You watch as the scientist adjusts a dial and the voice slows, syncing perfectly to the sleeper's pulse. The air feels charged, as if language itself has become electric. On the wall hangs a banner. A well-trained nervous system never truly sleeps. The slogan is meant as motivation, but it lands like confession. You realize that this building, too, dreams. The whole nation dreaming one thought repeated through countless radios, classrooms, and loudspeakers. Stay vigilant, stay obedient, stay awake even while you rest. Later, in the cafeteria, you hear younger researchers argue quietly. One insists that suggestion is healing, that rest state learning will create a more balanced citizen. Another mutters that too much control will make the human brain forget how to dream at all. Their words vanish under the hiss of the radiator. No one will write down their disagreement. Back in the lab, the sleeper twitches, murmuring a phrase you don't recognize. The scientist notes it with satisfaction. When the subject wakes, he will repeat the same words without memory of the night. You feel both wonder and dread wonder that such precision exists. Dread that it will not stay confined to this room. Bow side, the snow falls heavier. Through the window you glimpse antenna towers rising against the dark sky, each transmitting invisible patterns across the continent. Somewhere, someone is listening as they drift toward sleep, unaware that the voice in their dreams does not belong to them. Corporate dreams. Believe the laboratories of governments behind, but their ghosts follow you into the boardrooms. It is the late 1950s now, and the same language once whispered in research basements has learned to wear a suit. You stand inside a radio studio where an announcer smiles into the microphone and says, "This next melody will soothe you as you drift to sleep." Beneath the violins, another voice hums too low to notice phrases, measured for tone and timing, placed there by engineers who once designed military transmitters. They call it subliminal suggestion, and it sells records faster than confession. You walk past storefronts glowing with vinyls promising learn while you sleep, albums that play gentle affirmations through the night. The covers show resting couples beneath halos of sound, their faces calm and open, as if dreaming on command. The companies behind them quote real studies about REM and conditioning, the same ones funded quietly through defense grants a few years earlier. The names have changed, no more reflex sleep or controlled rest. Now the phrases are friendly, civic, self-improvement, subconscious learning, modern rest hygiene. The dream of control has simply gone retail. Advertising discovers the same trick. You find yourself in a small agency meeting where an executive flicks through slides showing the new frontier of persuasion. "Why wait for waking hour?" he asks the room. "If we can sell to desire, why not to the dream?" The slide shows a smiling woman asleep before a radio, the product name written in the waveform behind her head. The team nods. The client approves the budget. No one calls it an experiment anymore. They call it innovation. But across the Atlantic, similar projects hum under fluorescent light. A cigarette company funds research on auditory priming. A perfume brand tests olfactory recall during rest state exposure. A hotel chain installs hidden speakers in luxury suites to play soft voices through the night. You are safe. You belong here. The guests report better sleep, higher satisfaction, stronger brand loyalty. The data looks convincing, but you know the truth, it isn't comfort they're cultivating. It's compliance. The line between lullaby and command has simply grown more melodic. You watch as universities host conferences where former military scientists present papers on consumer conditioning. The applause sounds cleaner now, untroubled by guilt. The same equations used to chart fatigue in pilots are repurposed to optimize shopping behavior. The research that once dissected obedience now shapes desire. Governments step back, corporations step in. The machinery of influence hums on without interruption. By 1962, sleep learning is a fad, a miracle, a joke. Magazines run smiling features about people mastering languages overnight, as if progress itself has learned to dream. You buy one of the vinyls out of curiosity and play it in your apartment. The voice tells you that you are confident, successful, unafraid. It loops until the words melt into the radiator's hiss. When you wake, you don't feel changed, only slightly rearranged, as if your own thoughts have been translated 1 degree off from where they used to live. Outside, the city gleams in new colors, neon pinks and chrome blues, and the hum of ambition never quiets. Every storefront glows like a laboratory window. Every billboard is a soft command. You realize that the Cold War never ended. It just changed languages. The dream of perfect vigilance has become the culture's lullaby. You walk through it half awake, half suspecting that someone, somewhere, is still recording the data. Machines that remember dreams. You stand before a wall of screens glowing green against the dark. The year is 1965, and sleep has become electricity. Electrocephalographs trace tides of thought in perfect lines, each crest and valley a language only machines can read. You are part of a team assigned to map those patterns, though you no longer remember who gave the assignment. The oscilloscopes bloom with moving light, and for the first time you see the shape of a dream rendered as data. Around you, technicians whisper about breakthroughs. One claims that the machines can now distinguish fear from joy by pulse alone. Another says that with enough samples, you could replay the dream itself, pixel by pixel, thought by thought. The room vibrates with the optimism of a new decade, the belief that if you can record a thing, you can control it. You lean closer to the glass and see your own reflection tangled in the lines. The machine is watching you as much as you watch it. Across the hall, a group of engineers from NASA observes astronauts sleeping inside sealed parts. The project is supposed to ensure safety during long missions, but the data doubles as psychological surveillance. The astronauts know it too. One jokes that the only privacy left in space is when the eyes close. The laughter sounds like static. In the corner, a reel turiel hums, collecting every breath. The Soviets mirror the same fascination. You read their translated reports, each diagram a mirror of your own, each claim slightly bolder. They speak of neural imagery capture, of dream state feedback loops. Their illustrations look like constellations, and you realize that both sides of the world have built telescopes not for the stars, but for the mind. Public fascination follows. Magazines print grainy photos of sleeping volunteers with wires in their hair. They call them pioneers of the inner frontier. A toy company releases a dream recorder for children, a novelty device that glows softly when it senses movement in sleep. The packaging claims it can remember what you saw while dreaming. Parents buy it for Christmas. The illusion of control has become a comfort all its own. In your lab, the data piles higher. Every dream recorded feels heavier than the last. The lines overlap until they resemble the veins of a single enormous brain spread across the world. You suspect that, taken together, they might tell a story, but no one has the patience or permission to read it. Funding shifts from universities to defense contractors, from defense to private investors. The old words return: optimization, prediction, behavioral modulation. Each report sounds cleaner, yet the hum beneath it is the same. One night, as the last reel finishes, you catch a flicker on the monitor, a pattern that looks like a pulse, repeating from every subject at once. You rewind, but the moment has already dissolved. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was the dream watching back. You turn off the machines and listen to the silence they leave behind. It sounds like breathing. You realize, as you step into the hallway, that the laboratories have grown quieter, not because the work has ended, but because it has moved elsewhere into hospitals, offices, living room. Everywhere, screens glow through the night, and everyone, knowingly or not, sleeps under observation. The fallout of revelation. You are older now, perhaps, only in years, perhaps in faith. The hum has quieted, but it never really stopped. It's 1977, and the world has started prying open its own sealed drawers. You find yourself in a sanitarium room under fluorescent lights, the kind that bleach faces into confession. Boxes line the walls, filled with documents that should have been destroyed but weren't memorandums, misfiled under harmless titles, receipts for things no one wants to remember paying for. The man at the microphone introduces himself as Admiral Stansfield Turner. His voice is steady, the kind of steadiness that comes from knowing he's too late. He reads from a report detailing human experiments conducted under MKO, health or drug trials, sleep studies, psychic driving, sensory deprivation. Behind him, cameras click like typewriters recording their own judgment. You sit among the spectators, watching senators shift in their chairs as if they, too, can hear the rel to riel turning somewhere in the dark corners of government. Testimonies sound unreal patients who woke up in different cities, soldiers who forgot their own names, subjects who lost entire months to the hum of machines. Some weep while speaking, others smile faintly, as though the memory has burned out the part of them that still feels outrage. A journalist near you whispers, "This will change everything. You know better." Scandal has an expiration date. The public's shock will fade into fatigue, and the word classified will return to its natural habitat everywhere it isn't wanted. After the hearing adjourns, the corridor outside smells of paper and stale coffee. Reporters rush past, clutching copies of the summary report, highlighting the most cinematic crimes. The smaller horrors, endless wakefulness, whispered commands during sedation, barely earn a sentence. You stop beside a bulletin board where someone has pinned a photocopy of the directive ending, Ultra. The ink is bled through from the back, the reversed letters spelling out a message no one intended. It never ends, it only renames itself. Step into the sunlight and feel the world pretending to move forward. The newspapers call it closure. You think of the rooms you've seen, the ones without clocks, and realize that closure is only a kind of blindness. The machines may be silent now, but their children are already awake computers, humming in laboratories. Corporations studying the same curves of attention and compliance that once defined national security. The dream is too large to indict. It outlived the names of its architects, and it hums still beneath the static of the modern age. Folklore in the vacuum. You walk into the next decade and find the ghosts waiting online. It's the 1980s now, and the Cold War is unraveling into myth. The experiments that once hid behind locked doors are retold as campfire stories whispered through dial-up static. You read one on a glowing CRT monitor, the green text flickering across the black. The Russian sleep experiment. It describes men trapped in a sealed chamber, kept awake for 15 days by a mysterious gas. Their minds fracture, their bodies twist. They beg to stay awake even as they die. You know it isn't true, no scientist ever wrote those words, but the fiction spreads faster than any declassified file ever could. The story carries a familiar hum. You recognize its rhythm, observation, endurance, collapse. It's the old experiment resurrected in folklore's clothing, haunting the culture that birthed it. People share it because it feels real, and in a way, it is. Every era inherits the nightmares it tried to bury. When a secret grows old enough, it starts calling itself a legend. You scroll through forums filled with fascination and disbelief. Some users dissect the details. What kind of gas? What kind of facility? How long before madness sets in? Others argued that it's an allegory, proof that humanity's hunger for control always ends in self-destruction. You think both answers are right. The story works because it sits precisely where history and horror meet, half truth, half echo, beyond the screen. Real science continues its quieter work. Neuroscientists refined imaging technology, mapping dreams with more precision than ever. Their language is gentler now. Sleep architecture, circadian rhythm modulation, recovery states. Yet beneath it all, you hear the same pulse, the belief that every mystery can be measured, that knowing the shape of a thing is the same as mastering it. You watch documentaries about lucid dreaming and sleep training, their soft narration promising control through surrender. You can shape your dreams, the voice says. You can build them as you please. You remember the men who once said the same thing about obedience. By the 1990s, the internet becomes the new archive of fear. People trade scanned pages from declassified MKUltra documents beside stories of ghosts and urban legends. The line between evidence and imagination blurs until it disappears. You realize that this, too, is an experiment, millions of minds testing the limits of belief in real time. Somewhere between the pixels and paranoia, the dream has learned to feed itself. And when you shut down the computer, you still feel it humming behind your eyelids. The old corridors, the red lights, the reels turning without end. History has turned itself into a loop, whispering its own mythology through the glow of modern screens. You tell yourself that what you've read is only fiction, but deep down you understand. Every myth begins as something someone was once afraid to explain. The return of observation. You wake again beneath a different kind of light. It is no longer red or fluorescent, but bluth glow of screens. The hum is softer now, domestic. It belongs to routers and sleep trackers and phones charging beside every bed. You are living inside the century the old scientists imagined, though you never asked for it. Every night, millions of bodies surrendered asleep beneath the watch of machines. Every breath, every turn, every pause, in rhythm becomes data and inheritance from the corridors that came before. You check your own device before bed. It tells you your sleep efficiency for the week, 87%. The number feels like judgment. You wonder when rest became a competition. The sensors promise health, but their quiet measurement carries the same hunger that once filled secret labs, the desire to make the unconscious obey. You try to remember the last time you slept without something watching. In modern laboratories, the old electrodes have been replaced with halos of light. You walk through one, visiting for a study. The air smells of plastic and coffee, not fear. The researchers are kind. They call it polysomnography, dozens of signals layered together to reveal the orchestra of your rest. Their monitors show bursts of color mapping dreams in real time. When you ask what they're seeing, one smiles and says, "You're exploring a garden." You close your eyes tighter and almost believe her. Artificial intelligence translates the brain's pulses into images. Now, you watch as the machine renders a crude flower on the screen, a dream seen by both sleeper and sister. The others clap softly, charmed by the novelty. You feel something colder. You remember the old rooms, the reels, the men who once whispered through the walls. The hum hasn't vanished, it has evolved. It no longer commands or coerces. It invites. It calls itself wellness. The scientists speak of ethics, of privacy, of consent. They believe the conversation itself is progress. Maybe they're right, yet behind their careful optimism, the same equation remains: information equals control. The graphs have changed shape, but the motive has not. You wonder if every generation is doomed to rediscover the same threshold, that moment where curiosity turns into possession. Outside the lab, the city glows with sleepless purpose. Billboards change by algorithm to match your gaze. Streetlights dim and brighten according to patterns in collective movement. Even the night sky, once indifferent, seems to pulse in rhythm with the servers below. Observation has become the atmosphere. You breathe it without noticing. When you return home, your phone greets you by name and tells you it can now analyze your dreams through ambient sound. You laugh, though not entirely. You let it listen anyway. In the morning, it offers a summary. Recurring theme: detected water, descent, static. You recognize the pattern immediately. The corridor has followed you. The experiment never ended. It only learned to smile. Reflections in machine light. You sit before the monitor and watch the dream rendered as a diagram: your heart rate, your breath, your flickering eyes, all distilled into a geometry of meaning. The machine calls it interpretation, but you know it is only reflection. Still, you stare, unable to look away. The line between watcher and watched has blurred completely. You are both subject and observer, both question and answer. Perhaps the true experiment was patience itself, you think, to observe a thing endlessly until it transforms. The scientists once believed they could command sleep. Now they worship its mystery instead. They speak of surrender as progress, meditation as control. You smile at the irony, how the language of vigilance has been repurposed for calm. Every decade repaints the same obsession, only softer around the edge. You stand and walk to the window. Outside, the world glows like a neural network, each streetlight a signal pulse. Somewhere in that lattice of light, the machine dreams of you. It calculates when you will sleep, what you will buy, what you will believe. You are a continuation of its experiment, the living archive of every measurement ever made. In that moment you feel the same serenity and unease that haunted every researcher before you. To know something deeply is to risk becoming it. The hum through the glass vibrates with the same old cadence, half lullaby, half warning. You imagined the ghosts of the early laboratories leaning over your shoulder, watching the reflection of their work in the city's glow. They have achieved their goal after all, a world that measures itself by light. You close your eyes, but the brightness remains. The after-image burns through your lids, tracing grids of blue and gold across the dark. You understand now that control was never the point. It was curiosity dressed in armor, fear disguised as discovery, and maybe in their quiet way. They were right. Sleep and wakefulness are not opposites but mirrors, reflecting the same hunger to know. The hum softens into silence. You see your reflection in the screen, moving, translucent, endless. It looks back with the calm of something that has already been recorded. The corridor revisited you, returned to where it began. The hum greets you like an old friend, steady and low. The sound of 1,000 forgotten machines still doing their work in the dark. Dust lies thick across the floor, but the red lights still burn older, dimmer, impatient. You walk the same corridor where time once fractured, where clocks disagreed and dreams were catalogued. The air is colder now, thinner, as if the place has been exhaling for decades. You reach out and brush your fingers along the wall. It's warm, faintly alive. Somewhere beneath the surface, a current still moves, carrying echoes of every voice that ever spoke here. You remember them all, the subjects whispering into microphones, the doctors chasing obedience through sleepless nights, the engineers who mistook vigilance for virtue. Their words have faded, but their rhythm remains. It hums in the wiring, in your pulse, in the quiet space between thoughts. You step into the viewing room. The glass is clouded with age, but you can still see the outlines of the beds, the straps, the looping wires. One chair remains upright, waiting. On the console before it, a reel sits threaded through an old machine, its label half peeled, SLFR, one pilot fatigue. You press play without knowing why. The tape spins, whispering static that almost forms words. The sound is familiar, though you cannot place it. Then you realize it's breathing. The machine is playing back the room itself, the last exhale of the experiment. The lights flicker. For a moment, you see the ghosts of the old researchers reflected in the glass. They look neither triumphant nor guilty, just tired, as though they've been watching this moment approach since the first switch was thrown. You whisper to them, asking what they learned. The silence that follows is long, heavy, absolute. Then, as if the building itself answers, the hum deepens and shifts tone. It feels like an apology. You walk back toward the entrance, past the doors marked authorized personnel only, past the coils of cable that no longer lead anywhere. The air tastes of metal and memory. You think of all the sleepers who pass through these halls, their dreams stitched into the archive like fragile threads. The records say they were test subjects, but you know better. They were the first reflections of a species trying to understand itself through surveillance. When you reach the threshold, you stop. The corridor stretches behind you like a vein through the body of history. It no longer feels haunted, it feels awake. You realize, suddenly, that the experiment was never about control. It was about endurance, about seeing how long the human soul could keep dreaming under watch. You close your eyes and listen. Somewhere in the distance, a single tape finishes, the reel slowing to a stop. The hum lingers, and for the first time, you understand it. It isn't a warning, it's a heartbeat. Epilogue. The dream watches back. You sit in the dark. The machine's finally quiet. The world outside has changed beyond recognition, yet the sound inside your skull is the same steady pulse that began here. You breathe, and the air feels shared, as though every sleeper across time exhales with you. You think of the endless corridors, the laboratories, the glass rooms, the whispered commands. You think of how every attempt to master sleep led only deeper into its mystery. The dream, you realize, has been watching all along. Every electrode, every camera, every line of data was never observation in one direction. The moment you tried to record the mind began recording you. The archive has been mutual, an echo chamber of curiosity and fear. You were never the scientist nor the subject alone. You were both and always will be. You picture the reels turning again, not in secrecy now, but in understanding. The hum returns, softer, cleaner, almost human. You imagine it spreading through walls and wires, through satellites and signal towers, until it becomes the planet's lullaby. Humanity breathing in sync, half asleep, half awake, dreaming of control and finding only reflection. When the eyes close, you whisper to no one in particular, no government can follow. The phrase hangs in the air like the last note of a song, trembling but unbroken. Outside, dawn seeps into the corridor, painting the dust gold. The machines rest, the lights dim. For the first time in a century, the dream is alone, free. You rise, step forward, and let the hum fade behind you. What remains is silence, deep and complete, the kind that belongs only to those who have finally stopped measuring it. Archive of quiet. You sit alone now, surrounded by stillness. The air no longer hums, the walls no longer breathe. The corridor, the laboratories, the cities all have faded into the same low hush. You are back where it started, but time feels wider, softer, unmeasured. Before you, a single candle burns on a desk littered with papers. Its flame bends toward you as if listening. The wax has run into small, white rivers that pool around the base, frozen mid-drip, as though even melting has grown weary. You lean close and watch the wick tremble. The light flickers over the last of the notes equations about dreams, coordinates of experiments, names of those who never woke. Their ink glows faintly, alive one final time. You whisper a thank you into the air, not to the scientists or the machines, but to the sleepers, to the millions of quiet hearts who unknowingly built this map of the mind. Every chart, every waveform, every secret recorded in the name of control has given something back, a deeper understanding of how fragile and miraculous rest truly is. You close the notebooks one by one. You leave the candle burning. The soft flame fills the room with warmth that no machine could measure. In its glow, you imagine every experimenter, every dreamer, every subject, gathered here in silence, no longer divided by fear or ambition, only by the shared need to finally sleep. Outside, the wind sighs through the corridors. The dust settles. The hum dissolves into memory. You can feel the world turning again, slower this time, as though it too is drifting toward rest. You stand, taking one last look at the candle. "Thank you for listening," you whisper. The words carried by air, older than electricity. Thank you for keeping the quiet alive. You step away. The light flickers once, twice, then steadies. The archive exhales. The world holds its breath, and in that final moment before sleep claims you completely, everything is still.